So let's start perhaps by talking about tech error messages and what we do in response to tech error messages. And if Philip, you could just tell us again what you told us before.
Yeah, I mean, usually the messages are due to my own typos, and I've seen them before. So it's if by recompiling or well, rerunning LaTeX, whenever I've made a few changes to the document, it's usually obvious where my mistake is. It's usually just a simple typo. But if it's something I don't understand, I usually just search for the error message on the web and usually find it rather quickly. And if not, then I post to one of the tech news groups and usually get a good response from there. Yeah, there's also a rather active German tech news group, and it's read by people who are quite familiar with LaTeX and various problems and so on. So it's, yeah, it's usually possible to get an answer quickly from the news group if it hasn't already been answered in some online forums such as Stack Exchange or somewhere like that.
Do you ever look at documents? I mean, help documents or technical documents? Oh, I don't know how to do this. I'll find the answer in this document. Whenever I have a problem with Git, I search the online documentation.
Only if I'm doing something I've never done before. And then I would go back to one of the books I have, Copland Daily or, Lamport's book or something like that. But, most of the stuff I write is just sort of variations on, as far as the packages used and so on. I've usually done it before. And so it's, yeah, I would say actually going to the manuals and looking to see how to do this, how to do that. That was something I did a lot when I was starting out. Yeah. So I had a short introduction to LaTeX in, I don't know, about 20 pages in German. And then there was Lamport's book, and then this LaTeX guide by Copland Daily, and then the companion for the packages. And I think the first time I ever did something new, I read about it there. But relatively quickly, I built up sort of a repertoire of stuff that I commonly use, and that hasn't really changed much over the years. I mean, the main thing today is that some class file for a journal has a new version or something like that. And then, it would be their own documentation for that specific package. But I think it's pretty much on a relatively simple level. You're just writing an article for a journal, they have their class package and so on. And occasionally I find some bugs, but there's really not much one can do about that, because the time scale for getting the package changed is quite long, I think. And I think it's a consequence of the fact that most journals don't actually use LaTeX themselves. It's fine for authors who submit their manuscript, but once the manuscript has been accepted, they convert it to some other system. So they don't actually use LaTeX themselves. And so the motivation to actually maintain the packages is not really that high. And then I usually end up, trying to hack it myself or whatever.
I think at this point, perhaps we could hear from Kelly, if she's willing, because she has a sort of a different experience. And I think it's fair to say, Kelly, that you, as an author, you use tech only through R Markdown. So, no?
No, my first experience with it was in a statistics class at Simon Fraser University, where the professor required us to turn in our homework using LaTeX. And that was my first experience.
And
I would say good for him. I admit I'd never heard of R before I started attending these video conferences.
it's been around for a bit.
I do have a question though for Philip. So if you need a new tool in your tech, how do you go about choosing which package to add? So for example, I recently added a glossary where I wanted to use acronyms, but I wanted to be able to provide standardized output for those acronyms because I'm helping, say, 8 different people write documents, and I want them to all look the exact same, where everybody's using the same, say, word for a given survey.
Mhm.
And so I added this glossaries package, but there's like, you know, a handful of different ones that on CTAN that all do the same thing. So how would you go about choosing which package to use if you're a naive user and you don't necessarily understand the differences between them?
I mean, for me, that's a typical question for a news group. You know, I mean, I've been reading Usenet groups for 30 years, and that would be a typical question. You know, I've got this problem, and then someone says, "Oh, this package can do it," and then, you know, maybe there's more than one package, and then, you know, a few posts, and people usually come to consensus. Well, this is the best solution to do that, and so on. Recently, I had a problem that, for example, I found the parentheses too small in sort of large mathematical formula. I like the parentheses to completely cover what it's enclosing from top to bottom, but the default in LaTeX is to actually make it a bit smaller. And, you know, that's such a fine point. It's really not mentioned in any book or anything, but I got a really quick answer from the news group, and I have a sort of collection of my own macros, which I just normally include in every document, and then I just put it in there and forget about it, and so that's sort of my new default. But there's some, you know, specific tech or LaTeX solution for that, and yeah, but that would be a typical news group question. Yeah.
What do you mean by news group?
Usenet. How to explain that? Let me proceed that with a very short anecdote. When I was at Jodrell Bank, which is a radio astronomy observatory, the founder who founded it back in the 40s, this was in the 90s, he was still alive and still came into the institute. And one day at coffee, he looked at the current director of the institute. And of course, radio astronomers were some of the first scientists to use computers in their day-to-day work and so on. But, you know, he was from a time even before that. I mean, he was quite literally, he was someone like who addressed people with their last name with no title. You know, he'd say, "Smith, can I have a word with you?" And, you know, other people told me, I thought, you know, Sherlock Holmes might have said that, but no one today. Very, very old school. And he looked at the director at the time and said, "Line, tell me, what is the internet?" And so he was like 95. And, you know, maybe he had used some computer back in the 1950s or something. But, you know, even when he was still the director, he was very involved in management, administration, and so on, and so on. And then the people in the coffee room had a short discussion, and then one of the lecturers gave him sort of an executive summary of the internet. And he paused for a minute and said, "What's to prevent someone from populating it with rubbish?" So yeah, so how to explain the internet in 5 seconds, and how to explain Usenet.
Yeah, but
Usenet has been around before the World Wide Web. It's something like email or FTP, which runs on the internet, but on its own protocol. And it's like sort of like a chat function or whatever. People post articles and people can reply to them. It's sort of like you see on any sort of online forum or something like that. But I think the crucial difference is that it doesn't run on any one place. So you post this article to what's called an NNTP server, and then it gets copied to various other NNTP servers throughout the world. And then you can read the articles there with a newsreader, you can reply to them and so on. Yeah, and you know, they're still quite active. It's, like I say, it predates the World Wide Web. So, you know, people who were using the internet before the World Wide Web existed are familiar with it. But, you know, these days, many of the similar functionality would be in some sort of web forum or like Stack Exchange or something like that, or, you know, various things like that. But to me, it's a bit, I like it because it's very minimal. It's you know, text-based, text only, and you know, you can get a newsreader for essentially any platform you want. It's quick, and you know, I use the same editor I use for everything else in composing a newsgroup post or whatever. And you know, so there are news groups for a lot of computer-related stuff like tech and LaTeX, programming languages, you know, operating systems, but also, you know, about any topic under the sun, essentially. And there are thousands of such groups. And the tech group is quite active, actually, and a lot of, you know, experts, you know, read it regularly and answer questions there. So in that sense, it's quite useful.
Can I say a few comments about that? So I go back to 1993 or something, getting on for 30 years. And comp.text.tech.
Exactly, yeah.
Is part of the hierarchy. So it's computers and it's text and it's tech. Another one is comp.lang.python, which is the Python programming language. Now, in the 90s, comp.text.tech was where a lot happened, and it was the Stack Exchange of its day, if you like. And it produced an FAQ, which the UK Tech Users Group took responsibility for. And my introduction to the community was revising and improving the FAQ. And the FAQ had a sort of homespun system that allowed it to be both typeset, because it's a tech FAQ, so it has to be typeset, but also available as HTML as an online resource. What you can access, the way I access comp.text.tech now is through the web interface that Google provides. Google provides a web interface to all the news groups, and I authenticate.
Just a parenthetical remark here. One of the most common things I read is that the Google interface is one of the worst ones.
I don't use it very much, and I don't need to use any other. I find it a shadow of what it was before, and a personal thing is that every time somebody submits an article, a package to CTAN, CTAN sends an announcement of that to the comp.text.tech news group. So you get pages and pages of messages from CTAN, and perhaps on 20 or 30 items, 1 or 2 might be from a human being. And I don't like that. I think it's causing the news group to diminish in importance unnecessarily. As I recall, and I might be wrong, the comp.lang.python news group continues, and it sort of has a dual basis of it's a mailing list, but it's also a news group. Let's put it this way: they're a bit old-fashioned to the young people. News groups are a bit old-fashioned to the young people, and they're neither poisoned nor take advantage of the capabilities that HTML provides. The only thing really is that you can click on links.
Yeah, it's essentially text-based. Yeah.
Yeah, you can't do attachments, you can't put a figure in. Whereas, for example, GitHub Issues, just something Kelly and I were talking about before we started recording, has quite a rich interface, and it's integrated with commits. For example, if you make a commit that mentions an issue, then that goes into the discussion thread, the fact that somebody has done something related to this. So it's a much more fully featured thing. Just off the top of my head, the Linux kernel has its own mailing list and mailing system, if you like, with etiquettes and process and so forth. And it seems to be very much a system by experts for experts, designed to allow people to work very efficiently on a common purpose. And I think there may also be something of, well, if somebody doesn't have the technical expertise to manage this system, then perhaps they should find a different way to communicate what they've got to communicate. I remember I was at college, I was teaching, and there was a requirement for certain courses, for certain courses, for certain areas of business school, you had to have calculus, and there was no course. You could go through the business school without taking a course that required calculus, but it's still a requirement that you enter. And I think that was to, so to speak, may have been to provide a barrier to entry. And up to a point, I don't think that's a bad thing. If somebody has to make an effort to do something, then make an effort to do it properly. The Journal of Integer Sequences, which I mentioned last week, has a number of contributions from amateurs who think they've discovered something important, but may not have done. And the journal has a number of barriers of entry, so that people have made a mistake can be corrected without causing too much difficulty.